Hi.
Hello there. We're in Genesis chapter 17, but we're doing a bit of a sidebar today because the occurrence of the name El Shaddai for the first time in Genesis 17 links to something we're familiar with as witnesses, which is the Exodus 6 passage. We want to look at that in the light of the meaning of El Shaddai, because we made the point last time that the dominant idea is not God Almighty, as it is usually translated in English translations, but the mightiness or the greatness, the power of God are stressed by the words El and the word Elohim. So really, what's the additional thought in El Shaddai? It's God all-sufficient. And if you're an ex-Jehovah's Witness, you know the relevance of that, because you do not believe that God is all-sufficient as a Jehovah's Witness, you are forced to believe in men. You're forced to trust in men. Mm-hmm. They have the Spirit, you don't. But Christians believe that all of us have God's Spirit. So that's the force of the idea of God all-sufficient, that you do not really need anything else to be enlightened and to be enlivened, that is, to be saved. So if we just took this seriously and understood the full meaning of this name of God, El Shaddai, we'd realize a lot about why it's here in the book of Genesis. So we wanted to read the Exodus passage that we are somewhat familiar with as witnesses, but perhaps we're not familiar enough with it.
So Exodus 6, verses 2 to 4. God also said to Moses, I am the Lord. I appeared to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob as God Almighty. But by my name, the Lord, capital L-O-R-D, I did not make myself known to them. I also established my covenant with them, to give them the land of Canaan, where they lived as aliens.
The ESV says in that latter part of verse 4, where they lived as sojourners. And here's the silver sword version of those same verses. Then God said to Moses, I am Jehovah, and I used to appear to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as God Almighty, El Shaddai, but with regard to my name Jehovah, I did not make myself known to them. I also established my covenant with them to give them the land of Canaan, the land in which they lived as foreigners. Interesting that when we used to see that referred to as a proof text in any Watchtower publications, it was verse 3 that was emphasized. Verse 4 wasn't even used. But verse 4 obviously establishes the relationship between the name Yahweh, Jehovah, and the land. The name Jehovah is explicitly tied in the Bible to the land promises, and therefore to the nation of Israel. And you wouldn't have noticed that. You would think, okay, the land promises come in chapters 12 through 15 of Genesis. The name Jehovah becomes prominent. And notice it says, I used to appear, in the New World Translation. The personal appearances of Jehovah, Yahweh, are also stressed by this name Yahweh. So obviously Yahweh no longer personally appears. So it's no coincidence that the name has disappeared from the New Testament, and his theophanies, or personal appearances, are no more. So the tying of the name Yahweh to the land is what we would have completely missed as witnesses, because, well, it was just hidden from our eyes.
With the expression, I used to appear to as God Almighty, or El Shaddai, that kind of makes you ask the question, why? Why appear as that and not Jehovah to the patriarchs? Because as a witness, that's the important thing. So if it's that important, the name, why isn't he appearing to them as Jehovah in the earliest
How do you now answer
revelations? Well, I think if God Almighty is El Shaddai, and El Shaddai means all-sufficient, they needed to learn that. Before he makes firms up that covenant of the land, the promise of the land, he's got to make them really put all their confidence in him as being all-sufficient. He's the one that can protect them and keep them. And Abraham does learn that by the end of his life. He's having confidence in God, trusting.
And why was that so important then? Because they were sojourners, and they're wandering about from locale to locale, even to Egypt. And everywhere they go, they're going to run into this idea that is the essence of paganism, namely that you have to placate or please all of the local gods. You have to essentially make a deal with all of them,
right,
in order to avoid, well, disaster. But the idea of God all-sufficient, El Shaddai, is that, no, you don't have to worry about the local deities. They are much less powerful if they exist at all.
Yeah, he is the God that is all-sufficient.
He is the only true God, as the New Testament and Old Testament both plainly say. Mm-hmm. So this tying of the name Jehovah to the land, and the land promises, therefore the covenant with Israel, an eternal covenant with Israel, is what we would have missed. Mm-hmm. And I think that also is, we've done other videos on this, by the way, where we discussed the significance of the name disappearing, not only in the New Testament, but in the latter part of the Old Testament. So we'll link one of those videos at the end of this one. Mm-hmm. But here's some quotes from significant theologians about the meaning of the name and its revelation. Mm-hmm.
The first one, can you say how you pronounce his name?
Oehler.
Oehler.
Gustav Oehler.
Oehler. I would never say Oehler. Anyway, Gustav Friedrich. It says, it is no longer the powerful divinity ruling in the world in general that is El Shaddai, but the God who testifies of himself in special deeds of power, by which he subdues nature to the ways of his kingdom, making the childless Abraham the father of many nations, and who causes that race with which he has entered into covenant to experience his powerful presence in protection and blessing. And then there's a quote from the Theological Dictionary of the Old Testament, the editors being Botterweck and Ringgren. Though God's power dominates his designation so far, now God's grace is paramount. Nothing in Abraham nor his offspring merits God's faithfulness. His covenant will be eternal. 17 verse 7. I guess that's in Genesis, right? An unconditional promise, the people of Yahweh, was established by divine grace and survives only through his continuing mercy. Mm-hmm. So the name becomes a guarantee of his eternal commitment to the covenant, to this people. Mm-hmm. And so it's tied with grace. You say, if you're a witness, you're trained to say, well, why would he be committed to a people who are unfaithful to him? Well, because he is a God of grace. Yeah. So grace is particularly tied to this expression, El Shaddai, this name. Mm-hmm. Also, Vriezen, in his outline of the Old Testament, says the use of El to denote God is a feature of the patriarchal period. It emphasizes the greatness and sublimity of God. So there's the El component of Elohim, the power, the greatness. He goes on, which emphasis is perhaps found even more strongly in El Shaddai. A study of the names of God in Israel leads to the conclusion that they lay particular stress on the majesty of God's being, El Elyon, El Shaddai, and also the words Adon and Baal or Baal. These are titles actually that mean Lord, and Melech, King, as well as Elohim. So that, yes, the words Lord, Adon, Baal, and Melech, or King, all of those stress power. But El Shaddai stresses grace, and Yahweh stresses his covenant commitment to the promises made to Israel particularly. So the meanings are very important. And I think it's partly our society, for like our time period that we're living in, and partly because of the emphasis the Watchtower put on the name Jehovah. I think part of that is because we don't do things or think the way the people of the day thought, that the meaning of names was the important thing. It wasn't just a label or a tag on a person. You know, so when you hear the name McDonald, you just think that's his last name, that's it. But originally it would have made the person who heard it understand this is the son of Donald. Yeah. Or Joe Carpenter. You wouldn't just think, well, that's his name. You would think, oh, he's the carpenter. He's the town carpenter. the names had meanings. They were more than, and they were just words.
Mm.
I mean, we have this thing about this isn't a name because it's just
a title.
A title. But they were names. They were considered names because they described what the person did or what he was like or significance about him.
And they all stress different attributes of the character of the deity. Mm-hmm. In the case of God, there's dozens. We've got about 6 or 7 listed right here by Vriezen.
Yeah. And the other thing that when you were reading your quote, when you talk about Baal, as a witness, I would have immediately thought Baal, false god.
Mm.
Almost like that was the name of the false god. Not knowing the meaning of the word is just Lord.
Yeah. So the more common use in the Old Testament is Baals. They're local lords, local gods.
Yeah.
All of whom have the title Lord. Baal. Baal.
So when we became Christians, and I met Christians who used expressions like El Shaddai, and it was foreign to me. I didn't know what they were talking about. Or when I saw a book called The Names of God, I thought, what are you talking about? There's only one name. That was my ignorance, and my ignorance that was produced from the Watchtower that didn't go into those kinds of exploring the meaning of what they consider titles.
So the sad truth is we were grossly misinformed as Jehovah's Witnesses, and if we don't get this idea that God, El Shaddai, describes him in a way that we didn't understand him as Jehovah's Witnesses, namely that he is capable and willing to guide us and help us and save us. Mm-hmm. It's all grace. That's one idea we've just stressed.
Yeah.
And that we don't therefore need men. We don't need to trust men for either our guidance or our salvation. And that idea is so valuable all by itself if you're coming out of a cult. Mm-hmm. We wanted to link the one on Moses is about Exodus 12:12, is it not?
That's right.
Where it says that the Exodus and the plagues on Egypt were a judgment on the gods of Egypt. And we've done a video on that.
Yeah. And
also Daniel, our Daniel playlist, which was put together about 3 years ago, so a lot of people haven't seen it at all. But one of the videos in that playlist is Daniel was a witness, all right, but not to the name. Yeah. So we'll put that video on the screen along with the Daniel playlist.
Just one more little point. You know, when we talk about God being all-sufficient and the exploding of the pagan gods, that they believed, they called them Baals, lords, all the other powers, because they believed in localized gods. And that was what was being smashed.
Yeah.
This idea that they needed all these other gods, and you had to placate this god when you were here or there. But Yahweh, or El Shaddai, he's all-sufficient. Mm. You don't need to worry about these other gods.
And that's why Abraham, when he's wandering around, builds an altar to Yahweh, because he wants to witness to the community. He believes in a God that transcends all the boundaries of the local gods.
Right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So we'll put those two links to Daniel, the Daniel playlist, and that specific video, and Moses and the gods of Egypt, Exodus 12, verse 12.
Good.
See you soon.